welcome to episode 238 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Malcolm Baum,
Nathan Smith.
In today's episode, we'll be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1, and in part 2, we will be concluding our Pam Grier series with 2001's Bones. But let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. Nathan, you had a couple new releases as well as it's an older release, but I'm going to let you lead it off with the new ones.
Yeah, I was able to catch a couple films, two movies that both have been around for a little bit. They both premiered at fall festivals last year, or I guess Ashes Purest White premiered at Cannes. But they both premiered at festivals last year, so they've been around, they've been playing. People have seen them, but they're both now getting their official US releases. Transit just came out in New York, and I know is coming out throughout the rest of the country throughout March and April. I know it's opening in Nashville, at the end of the month. Ashes Purest White, I know, opens in New York this week, and I think has a nationwide rollout to follow. They're both very good movies by sort of, I guess, two filmmakers who have kind of aged into being some of the real serious art house heavyweights of this generation, of this decade and of this century so far. Both of these guys are really, I think, on a lot of people's lists for the important filmmakers of the 2000s and the 2010s. The first of these movies, which I actually have a review of it coming out next week in the Nashville scene, is Transit by the German filmmaker Christian Petzold, who's actually somebody I'm not super familiar with. And that's I think this is a really great movie, and it's my fault, I think, for mischaracterizing Petzold's work sight unseen. I got the feeling just from the way people talked about his earlier movies like Barbara and Phoenix that they were these sort of just dry, rigid, serious, realist movies. And at the time those movies were coming out, 2012, I think 2013, 2014, that was just not what I was really into. That was not really what I was looking for. I was kind of a burgeoning cinephile who didn't really want anything to do with stuffy realism. But his movies really aren't that at all. Actually, they are, I think, a sort of have a sense of realism, but are constantly sort of trafficking in genre tropes, specifically kind of tropes mined from old Hollywood genre movies. A number of his movies are sort of riffing on or remaking older American films. Like Phoenix is a little bit of a riff on Vertigo. His movie Yella is a riff on Carnival of Souls. One of his earlier movies, I can't remember the name, is also a readaptation of the Postman Always Rings Twice. So he's somebody who has seen a lot of movies and is really thinking about kind of the history of cinema, but he's also thinking about, I think, the history of Europe and the history of Germany politically. His movies are sort of haunted a little bit by the legacy of the Holocaust, the legacy of Germany's division and then reunification. I think kind of haunted by the legacies of both capitalism and communism in that part of the world. So there's a sort of almost a kind of a liminality, I think, to his movies a little bit, and that sometimes they're set in the present, sometimes they're set in the past. But there's always a sense, a little bit of almost blankness to the time that these movies are set in, because they're always haunted by history. The past is something really palpable. And this movie is Transit, is set ostensibly in contemporary times, even though we don't really see cell phones or computers or a lot of markers of 2018. But it's actually an adaptation of a novel of the same name, based on the author's experiences fleeing the Nazis during World War II, published in 1944. So obviously the novel takes place during World War II and is about Jews fleeing the Holocaust. But this movie is about that, but in really sort of obscured, vague terms. We hear about cleansing, we hear about fascists and kind of the coming invasion, But there are no explicit references, which I think is really for the best, to kind of just have this like air of intrigue around whatever doom is coming to these people. We follow this guy named George, who's from Paris, and it's sort of implied that he is Jewish, but again, none of these things are really made explicit. So he's fleeing Paris to go to Marseille because Marseille is a port city. From there, he's hoping to leave the continent, maybe go to Mexico, maybe go to the US. He really doesn't care, just as long as he gets somewhere, where the government's not trying to murder him. And he is tasked while he's leaving Paris with taking the papers of this famous writer who has just killed himself. He soon realizes that this writer's name will actually get him a lot of access, and so he assumes his identity, and it kind of takes on this sort of flavor of a like Hitchcock wrong man story, but it has this political twist to it because he's a refugee fleeing political violence. So there's like a little bit of a bent to that kind of classic genre trope. And from there, it actually becomes a sort of a really compelling romance because he meets the wife of this writer whose identity he's taken on, and she's convinced that her husband is going to come back, but he's dead and does not. And so the stakes for George's departure get a little bit higher. He becomes uncertain as to whether he should leave or not, as to whether he should give his identity to someone else and let them go in his stead. So it is a very like prescient movie. I mean, I think with the state of global politics, this is one of the few movies I've seen that I feel like really actually manages to say something that's kind of compelling and urgent without being like on the nose and insufferable about it. It's a really urgent movie. That's also, I think, a very compelling thriller in an interesting way, because it is sort of in this stripped down, kind of vague, realist style. There's not a lot of signifiers of the action genre, but it is a very suspenseful movie. So it works, I think, on these multiple levels. On this social political level, it has a lot of things to say about our kind of current climate, but it's also a very engaging and very direct and movie. And also it has a great, for any Talking Heads fans out there, cough, cough, Andrew Swafford has a really great needle drop over the end credits that I won't spoil fully. So that's coming out soon, and I really recommend seeing it. Ash's Purest White, the other new release I have to talk about, actually I think is sort of related to Transit in a weird way, because it's a very politically and socially engaged movie, as its director Zha Zhengke's movies always are. But it's also a really sort of a conscious riff on action movies and on the action genre. This is not the first time in his career that Zha Zhengke has referenced John Woo movies. There's a part in his movie Still Life from 2006 where we see a character sort of imitate Chow Yun-fat lighting money like off of his cigarette. And in this movie, we actually hear the theme from John Woo's movie The Killer multiple times. So already, if you know that piece of music when you're like, this movie is starting, you're sort of set up for something kind of relating to that criminal underworld. And this is a movie that is about that, but in a sort of a roundabout way. It starts off at the dawn of the 21st century and then goes through time in a structure that's probably will be really familiar to people who saw Zha's last movie, Mountains Made Apart, which was set like the beginning of the millennium, a little bit further on and into the future. This movie is set in 2001 and I think like 2008 and then like I think 2018 maybe or something like that. I'm not totally sure. But so this is, starts off in this first act is about a woman named Zhao who is in a relationship with a businessman who's trying to become legitimate, but who still has these sort of underworld connections. They spend a lot of time at the clubs. They spend money somewhat extravagantly. And it's set in this sort of surreal world that a lot of Zhezhenko's movies are in, where kind of extravagant shows of wealth are sort of right up against the sort of working industrial rural condition of a lot of the majority of China. But quickly things go south, and Zhao has to go to prison after she defends her boyfriend from an attack from some criminals who just want to take him out. Guns are forbidden. She takes his gun and fires it into the air, doesn't even shoot anyone, and takes the fall for him, goes to prison for like a decade. And then when she gets out, he's not there waiting for her. And she's been sort of abandoned by the world. She has no money. She has to come up with, ways to sort of scam people out of money, so she can get, from the next train station, to the next train station. And so it becomes this movie. I mean, it is very, as always, like very reflective movie on kind of like how China has changed over the last 2 to 3 decades, as it's opened up more and more, as it's undergone all of these kind of reforms, and becomes, so capitalistic. It's really about that, existing in this larger project. But it's also very much a movie about a woman, about Zhao's existence in the world as a woman, how men treat her, the things that she has to kind of do, to get by. So I wasn't really, I knew, that she was also in Mountains Made Apart. I knew she was a great actress, a really stunning lead performer, but I wasn't expecting actually this kind of feminist gender commentary, that wasn't, not to say that like Zhezhenko is not a filmmaker who is ignorant of gender in any way, but I wasn't expecting that really to be the focus of this movie. Like I said, it sort of sets you up as this action riff and then totally undoes that and becomes something very different, and just sort of flips it totally, because the woman is the one who is holding the gun in this movie. So I know they're both, Transit and Ashes Purest White, like I said, are both kind of rolling out across the country throughout March and April, and are both immensely worth your time. Whether or not you're familiar with these directors' previous movies, I think they're both very good, honestly, summations of their projects thus far. And they both also are serious political movies that also have this kind of like genre twist hook to them. So if you need that, to get you interested, there's that for you too. So I really recommend seeing both of these movies. I think they're going to be among the year's best. So
friend of the pod, Darren Hughes, was a big fan of both of them when he saw them in Toronto. So
yeah, I think they're both movies that could only really be made right now in this moment in time. So I have another movie to talk about, an older movie, if we still have time for that.
Yeah, you and Malcolm take care of it.
Yeah, this is. I guess I should preface this movie by saying that I just recently decided to sign up for Netflix's DVD by mail service, because all props to the New York Public Library, but sometimes they are very slow. Like if I wanted to see First Man right now through the New York Public Library, I would be like person 950 on a hold list of like 1,000 people. So I just, I was like, I want to get some DVDs. I want to see some movies that aren't on streaming, and I don't always want to torrent, even though I am fine with that. So I signed up for Netflix's DVD service, which I had like when I was a kid. And the first movie that I got was Warren Beatty's Bulworth from 1998, a really vicious, hilarious, shocking, satirical comedy, unlike anything else I think that has maybe ever been made in American movies. I don't know. One of 3 movies that Warren Beatty has been in the last 20 something years. It's about a man named Bulworth, Senator Jay Bulworth of California, who this movie kind of sets up through through showing us his office, through showing the photos in his office, that he, maybe in the 60s and 70s was something of a kind of a Bobby Kennedy. Maybe, we see pictures of Malcolm X and MLK and of him, with different radical figures. He talks about how much he loves Huey Newton. So we get the sense that when he was younger, he was a kind of a progressive radical guy. But we hear in the opening credits of this movie, just over and over again, these television spots that have been running for his latest campaign re-election for his Senate seat. And the views that he's espousing are these just like awful conservative dog whistles, about personal responsibility and laziness and all of these just like coded racist and anti-Semitic things. And he's just crying, losing it completely while we're hearing the TV spots aired over and over again. So we get the sense that this guy's life has not taken quite the direction that maybe he hoped as a young idealist politician. And so the movie starts and he decides to kill himself, but does so through some rather curious means. He takes out a $10 million insurance policy from an insurance guy who is I guess a lobbyist or an insurance lobbyist of some kind, who's really close with him and really trying to, influence him and sway Bulworth's politics. So he takes out a $10 million policy and then takes a hit out on himself. The $10 million will go to his daughter and his life will be over and he will be freed from this sort of political drag that he's having to do. But he has this whole complete breakdown. He doesn't sleep for days and he eventually forgets that he's taken a hit on himself. So he somehow just, in knowing he's going to die, but then forgetting he's going to die, just absolutely liberates him. He's supposed to go to all these campaign stops. The election's coming up. He goes to a church in South Central and he's reading a speech and he stops reading it. And, somebody stands up and yells and asks, you said you were going to invest in this community after the riots. You said you were going to fund us and help us get back on our feet. And you didn't do that. And he, rips up his speech and just starts going off and starts talking about how, well, how are we going to help communities of color? While we're in the pocket of big insurance, how are we ever going to pretend that's an actual interest of the United States government when all these lobbyists have all this power and all this influence? And from there, from campaign stop to campaign stop, he just basically just unravels and starts to speak entirely in rhymes. He starts to rap his views. He falls in love with this young black activist played by Halle Berry. It's just a really nuts movie and crazy to me that anybody wrote this, anybody produced this, invested in this. I mean, it wasn't really a successful movie necessarily. But it's just I don't know. It's very rare to me to watch a movie, from decades ago and have it speak so perfectly to to our political moment, because this is a moment in time when people are, for better and worse, really just wanting politicians to cut the bullshit and say something genuine. And this is a movie very much about that. It's also very much about the fact that Republicans and Democrats are both these machines and both in the pocket of business and are really not that different from one another. Warren Beatty just comes out right and says it decades before most people were saying that. It's a movie where he calls directly for single payer healthcare, and says that we need socialism. So it's just the fact that this movie has not been fully reclaimed as a masterpiece. I mean, it is a movie with its problematic elements and with its kind of grating edges, but I think it's resonant in a way that I don't know. I think this is just one of the maybe best American movies. I don't know, Malcolm, if you have anything to add. I know are also a big Bulworth lover.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Warren Beatty's directorial efforts in general, and
Oh yeah,
I
a wacky career, really. Like
yeah, hey, the rules don't apply when it comes to his career, but
they don't. They don't. The rules don't apply to Dick Tracy.
yeah, and I something and he's also kind of had a leftist streak throughout his career. The one
Absolutely, Reds.
Reds and Parallax View are both some of the most leftist Hollywood movies I could think of, at least. And I think what's one thing that's really interesting about this movie, especially in its depiction at the start, is that something I noticed while watching a movie about deep state individuals, maybe a movie like JFK, or even a movie like Vice, to bring a little new movie in here, is that these politicians are framed as kind of these conniving, kind of like, and to a certain extent they are conniving in real life, but conniving, almost like evil geniuses to an extent. And one thing I like about Bulworth, the character, is at the start it really shows how pathetic he is, and that's kind of
Yeah, absolutely.
that's how I kind of think it is closer to real life, how these deep state politicians are. It's just kind of people kind of starting out with these political aspirations and getting bogged down by the system, but to the point where they just are complacent in their actions. And I think Bulworth does a good job showing these people are not necessarily scheming. They're just they're puppets, for lack of a better term. But yeah, there's something about Bulworth that really feels razor sharp in its satire. And I think maybe the reason it hasn't been reclaimed is that some of its maybe depictions of black neighborhoods in LA, stuff like that, is a little problematic. But I think Beatty does have his heart in the right place. I think he's just trying to speak to systematic oppression and whatnot. But this movie, it really does go places that I like, that you wouldn't expect this movie to go. It's one of the only movies I could ever think of that name drops the COINTEL program, and stuff like that. So Beatty really does go there. I think amongst more far leftist circles, his politics might not get a bad rap, but he might be labeled as a champagne socialist, et cetera, or something like that. But I think he puts in he does his political homework, and this movie is really funny. I think a lot of people, they hate, I guess they don't like the uncomfortableness of old white guy rapping who's really bad at it. But I find that funny personally. So
I mean, it's like the Bulworth, the original Hamilton, am I right? But it is also, though, it's funny because even though he is bad at rapping, he's doing all these different kinds of cadences and stuff. And there's the monologue towards the end when he's on the news show and he's wearing just this ridiculous outfit of baggy shorts and a baggy hoodie and stuff, and he's got sunglasses on, and he does this crazy extended monologue all rapped and does all of these different sort of rhythms and cadences within it. So it's this performance that is really crazy and unhinged, but also feels very thought out and very meticulous in how the performance is designed. It's just such a great collection of talent. It's of course, Warren Beatty, as we've said, Halle Berry, Don Cheadle, Paul Sorvino as the villain. You have a cameo from Amiri Baraka. You have a soundtrack by Ennio Morricone. You have cinematography by Vittorio Storaro, who did The Conformist and Apocalypse Now. Edited by Robert C. Jones, who is a regular collaborator of Hal Ashby's, and Billy Weber, who's worked with Terrence Malick a bunch. So really, it's just not only is it one of I think the funniest Hollywood movies ever, but it's also just formally at the top of its game. The movie takes a really dramatic, sharp turn at the end, which maybe doesn't work for everybody, but it really works for me because it the movie is already very well made, but slips into this totally different formal register that is almost something operatic and kind of melodramatic, formerly melodramatic, sort of like a Coppola movie almost. And it's got this really, romantic Morricone music and just this ridiculously like Janusz Kaminski, like oversaturated to hell light. And it just becomes for like 5 minutes at the end of the movie, a completely different film. So it's just like it's really funny, but also a fucking like seriously well-made movie. So I highly recommend it to people of all political persuasions.
If you listen to Hamilton, you can handle the raps, Warren Beatty.
Absolutely.
It's not too far off.
It's just it's basically Tatiana. I feel like his flow. It's just sort of like falling all over the place.
Blueface.
Malcolm, you had a movie.
Yeah. Keeping on the satire train, we have a movie called Four Lions by notable British satirist Chris Morris. And this is the only movie of his to date, although I think he has a movie premiering at South by Southwest this year. And I'm excited for it. But what Four Lions is about it's about a group of radicalized young British Muslim men who aspire to be suicide bombers. And we have Riz Ahmed as the lead. And, these people are deeply critical of Western society and imperialism and all that. And but what's interesting about the movie is that, it's mostly about their scheme to create a big terrorist attack that'll notarize a lot of attention, and them trying to think that up and plan that out, and the humor that comes with that. And what's interesting about this movie is that, this easily in the wrong hands could be, a deeply, racist, movie, just dumb, thoughtless. But I think it's handled really well in that it aims to humanize these bombers first, but through humor. The one thing about the movie is that it's really being spearheaded by Omar, the Riz Ahmed character. He's the only one who really has an idea and a drive to, do this act. The others seem just to be going along because it's what they're expected to do. They've been kind of almost duped into that. And in seeing that, I mean, depictions of, Muslims in the 21st century film is pretty bad. It's probably one of the most maligned, subgroups out. You look at a Zero Dark 30 or just, mostly props for, American war films. And Chris Morris being a Brit, he's a British fellow, he kind of takes a different spin on it and shows kind of the trials and tribulations that come with it. And there's just some great details. And Chris Morris is a deeply funny individual to me. And one funny detail of one of the four of the bombers, one of them is, he's a white guy, he's a convert. And he's always the one trying to push things the farthest. And, it's kind of a critique of how people, they join a movement or an ideology, and instead of thinking of the bigger picture, kind of conflate it with their own problems and own issues. And Barry, the white Muslim terrorist, is a great example of that. He said in the movie, there's a scene where they're deciding, where to bomb. And he said, why don't we bomb the mosque and radicalize the moderates so that there could be an uprising? And they're like, and there's a scene, and then Riz Ahmed, the Omar character, says, so we should try to attack others by punching ourselves in the face or something. And there's a scene where he has him and Barry get into a fight, and Barry punches himself in the own face to show that it'd work, and it ends in hilarity. But I think Chris Morris, he's someone who I think does satire in a way that really speaks to modern times. And Four Lions is definitely that movie. It speaks to modernity in a great level, and just how these characters really seem disenfranchised, almost to the point where that it's like, I guess terrorism is the logical option. And another great satire work that I've been looking into to Chris Morris is his TV miniseries Jam, which I've been a huge fan of, and does, like, I don't know, I think a lot of people are kind of tired of like Trump jokes and SNL. I think that's been like, passing as, sort of a social satire. But Jam kind of speaks to kind of like the alienation and, kind of the alienation that modern living brings and stuff like that, and through, extremely dark humor. And Chris Morris's Ho of War, I think, is kind of like my sweet spot for satire. And I think is kind of similar into Bulworth in that it cuts razor sharp. So I'd recommend checking anything by Chris Morris out. You just look up Chris Morris on YouTube. Pretty much all three of his miniseries are there. And Four Lions is a great movie.
Cool stuff. I maybe I missed it, but you don't know if it's streaming anywhere?
I don't think it is, but I think you could like purchase it on like Amazon, for like $3. Or it's on Hulu. It's on Hulu.
Oh, cool stuff. All right, I'm just gonna bring the party down to wrap up this part one.
Oh, nice.
So I mapped out time and went through the new HBO documentary Leaving Neverland. It's exploring the experiences by James Safechuck and Wade Robson, who both when they were kids were friends with Michael Jackson and have come out as saying that they were sexually abused by the singer, and are talking about their experiences both when they were children as well as now as adults. It also includes their number of their family members, both mothers for both of the guys, as well as brothers and sisters, and later in the documentary both of their wives. And this was a movie I didn't rate it on Letterboxd. I saw this somewhere, but it's not really. This is really not less a documentary and more just like a confessional or a testimonial. I mean, it's a lot of this movie is just these guys, talking, whether it's kind of a medium shot straight on, or they have kind of a shot ahead, overhead, and just going into explicit detail about their experiences with Michael Jackson, both, just experiencing him as this media personality, and then also as this man who was abusing them. And I mean, this documentary is 4 hours long. The first part really is about them as children into young adulthood, and then the second part is kind of their experiences with Jackson as the accusations around him start to crop up in 2003 and 2008, I think, where other children who he's been associated with, are taking him to court, and their relationship still with him in order. It's they still kind of have this complicated relationship with him, and are clearly just recently getting through that. But like I said, I didn't know really how to rate this. I was thinking a little bit about kind of the discussion that we had during our documentary series a couple years back. And, I was trying to parse like what cinematically this is doing. And there's not too much cinematically. Like I said, the interview shots are pretty normal. It cuts away to like... these kind of overbearing drone shots of like LA and Neverland Ranch and different places like that while they're talking. But the one really effective technique that I found, and I I don't know. Again, I'm reading too much into this. Is they also have these cutaways to either kind of archival home video like footage of the men as kids, either just kind of them by themselves or them with Jackson, or like a photo with Jackson. And you go and you have these different stills, and the way that Dan Reed, the director, and his editors frame it is you have the still or the video in this kind of box square, not necessarily Academy ratio, but just this kind of box square in the middle of the screen, and then around the rest of the screen is just completely in black. You kind of contrast that with the interviews, the modern day interviews, as well as the aerial shots that have a much more traditional widescreen view, but you still kind of have the boxes, the black boxes on the top and the bottom. And I was thinking about just that space while watching, especially some of the archival footage, and especially the testimonies of like the parents, the two mothers, in relation to this, because I think it's incredibly easy to blame, to immediately, place blame on them and say, because they weren't paying enough attention, this happened, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's easy to do that. They clearly recognize that, and they kind of own up to that as the documentary goes along, even though the actions that they took were not right. But I was also thinking of just kind of the larger context of processing abuse and being able to reckon with abuse just as a population, and how these kind of black boxes, you have these nostalgic, kind of film grainy memories of things happening, and you're not seeing the abuse acts happening in these images. You're seeing what looks like happy times, what looks like happy memories of these kids, whether it's with Michael Jackson or just enjoying their childhood. To me, the kind of blackness around these images is the kind of unspoken about, atrocities, and the unspoken about abuse, and just everything that's happening that we don't necessarily want to address, whether it's what's happening that's being described in this movie, or what's happening in the way that men in power are acting, today in 2019, as much as in the early, in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, when this is taking place and these stories are happening. And that kind of was effective to me, just because when you have the modern day interviews, you still have this kind of black space. You still have this almost uncharted, recognized space, because even in 2019 there's still lines that have not been drawn in. It's still a little bit open. It's still a little bit uncharted. And I don't know, it's I don't really know how you're supposed to reckon with Jackson's output at this point. It's a pretty damning interview or documentary movie, whatever you want to call it. I've seen the detractors, the Jackson stands that are pointing out, kind of poking holes in Wade Robson, one of the guys' stories and stuff like that. But I think it goes back to the amount of detail and the amount of effort that these men put into really shedding every detail and being completely full. They're just completely forthright and honest with us. It's just difficult to say I don't believe them. And so I don't know. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can say, yeah, this is a great movie. I think it's an important piece of deciphering pop culture in our current age, in the way of thinking about and allowing us to think larger about what it means to reckon with terrible artists that make great art but are terrible, horrible, despicable people. And I think as kind of a skeleton key for that, it's interesting, but I'm not sure what to make of it as a quote unquote film. But it's Leaving Neverland. It's on HBO now. Yeah, it's it's definitely a map out some time and be ready to have to go through a large bit of emotional hurdles. Yeah, that's I don't know. It was just so deeply upsetting. It's really graphic, and it's just like listening to that and listening to the detail of them describe it is just I don't know. It's
yeah, it seems rough.
it's sad.
I was kind of I was tentative to watch this movie because I guess I was just wondering, the graphic details, that stuff kind of sort of upsets me, I guess, personally. So I don't know. I've been kind of scared to check it out.
It's extremely upsetting when they're like describing what's happening, and then the parents are talking about, like, there's multiple instances where James Safechuck is describing Michael Jackson doing these things to him while he's on tour, because this is around the time that the Bad tour is happening, and Michael Jackson's doing these things, and his mother's talking about all of these people they're meeting because they're on tour with Michael Jackson, and all of this. She just goes into this whole thing about how initially they had like rooms that were close to Michael Jackson, and this is at the point when they started letting him sleep in the room with Michael Jackson, and then they noticed after on each stop their rooms continued to get farther and farther away, and how at times she would like go over to the room and like listen in, and it just sounded like they were playing, and it's just I don't know, it's just sad. It's just such an, like I said, I don't know how to decipher it as a movie, but I think it's something that's important in terms of deciphering, reckoning with bad men making good art in this current age. I think that it at least explores that to a intelligent degree. But yeah, Leaving Neverland. It's on HBO. We're going to take a short break, but before we do, I'm going to mention some two things that we have on Cinematary.com. Mike Thorne and Andrew Swafford did a dual dialogue review of Lords of Chaos. That's on the site now. I highly recommend that. And then Courtney Anderson, who has become our Marvel beat reporter, came in with a Captain Marvel review, which she said was fine. And so you can check both of those out. We have of course our Patreon page, but I think Andrew is about to tell you more about that in our ad break, which is coming up right now.
Hey, Cinematary listeners, Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
Just then, I received a phone call. It was Morpheus, and he said I was the one. Realizing the deal had been done, I turned to the east and all praised the sun. Now they blast me, but they bullets miss. I do my 3D dance and remain undaunted. Then simply reverse the process as the hot slugs hit their chest plate. Checkmate, game over.
And we are back with part 2 of episode 238 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing and concluding our Pam Grier series with 2001's Bones. It was directed by Ernest Dickerson from a script by Adam Simon and Tim Metcalf. The movie stars Snoop Dogg, Pam Grier, Khalil Kain, Clifton Powell, and Bianca Lawson. Jimmy Bones is a legendary protector and patron of his thriving neighborhood. Cool, handsome, and respected, Bones is the benevolent caretaker of his people until he is betrayed by those closest to him. Flash forward 20 years, crime and drugs have crumbled the neighborhood, and Jimmy Bones has become a charismatic emblem of better times, but his spirit is about to make a comeback. Bones began as a pitch to New Line Cinema by producers Peter Heller and Lloyd Segan. Quote, Snoop Dogg had done a cameo in a film I produced called Caught Up, Heller explains. I thought Snoop had real star potential with his laid-back charisma and powerful presence, and speaking with him, it was clear that Snoop was very interested in doing a horror movie. Heller approached writers Adam Simon and Tim Metcalf, both aficionados of the horror genre, whom he'd worked with previously. Simon had an idea for a horror film, which he and Metcalf then began to adapt to fit Snoop Dogg. Quote, we learned that in addition to horror, Snoop loves Clint Eastwood's work and was also interested in doing a Western. The two genres coalesced into a form where in the first half of the movie, Snoop is the ghost in a classic haunted house story, and in the second half, he is more like a Clint Eastwood character seeking retribution. Peter Heller and the writers approached me. This is producer Lloyd Segan. He says that Peter Heller and the writers approached me with the idea for Bones at the time, describing it as High Plains Drifter meets The Crow meets Nightmare on Elm Street with Snoop Dogg as the lead character. He continued, we're creating a whole new genre within the genre. The idea of doing a gothic dark thriller set within the horror genre makes it exciting. Jimmy Bones is a brandable franchise character, which is something every studio likes. A New Line has particular expertise in creating a number of branded franchises as diverse as Nightmare on Elm Street, Blade, Rush Hour, and Austin Powers. I love that collection of franchises in association with Bones. Dickerson describes his vision for the film as gothic horror, harkening back to some of the great horror classics like The Exorcist and The Omen. Quote, I'm a big fan of the Italian gothic cinema directors like Mario Bava, Dario Argento, and Antonio Margheriti. And Bones was a chance to do something on this level. I've seen horror films since I was a kid, but I also read literature, and the script grasped the larger vision of the genre, which is about people coming to grips with the fantastic. In Jimmy Bones, Snoop Dogg said he discovered the type of film role he had long been looking for. Quote, people are always saying to me, Snoop, why haven't you starred in a movie? Because it was never the right movie, the right situation, until now. This was the perfect role, and it was handcrafted for me. Jimmy Bones is a real person, the lord of his neighborhood. He goes through the community spreading love, keeping the peace, not allowing drugs and violence. But he's someone who is wronged by evil people and gets the opportunity to take his revenge. I'm able to come back and take care of those who thought they took care of me. Dickerson on casting Pam Grier, quote, when I was casting the role of Pearl, I was thinking which black actress can play from 30 years of age to 50 years of age and do it with grace and style and have the strength needed to portray the character. And the only person I thought of was Pam. For me, it was a kind of Pam or nobody else mindset. He added, when I told Snoop that I was trying to get Pam to play Pearl, he said, oh man, you have to get her. And when I told Pam that Snoop was playing Jimmy Bones, she said, I love Snoop. So they were a mutual admiration society from the beginning. The film had a worldwide box office gross of $8 million on a $16 million budget. In 2001, Entertainment Weekly said, maybe pure trash, but it's trash made with the kind of oozy psychedelic zest that powered a movie like A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. In 2001, the New York Times said, in exalting the very worst of humanity, Bones displays a special glee and an unusual density of scary imagery. And in 2001, the Hollywood Reporter said, a garish, grotesque slab of silliness drowned in bloody visual effects, overkill, with an end result that is more horrible than horrific. On that note, let's dig into Bones, and I guess let's start a little bit with just the movie in general. I mentioned that Dickerson kind of talked about having that kind of the Italian horror giallo vibe to it, and you definitely get that when it comes to like the way blood spurts and the way just violence looks in this movie? I mean, was that something before learning that you kind of got that vibe that he was kind of doing something like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, this movie is so obsessed with corpses and like, maggots and just really creepy, crawly, like nasty, slimy substances. So it definitely, like, for me, it even all the filmmakers that Dickerson named in your quote, Zach, it also reminds me a lot of Fulci, just in that like emphasis on just like deteriorating, degraded flesh, which is something that a bit of an interest in. Sometimes when it comes to movies, I like that kind of imagery. This is like it has such a European flair to it, just the whole Gothic thing. It's like very not conventional American horror, really.
Well, just to add to your point, I was going to say, not just deteriorating flesh, but like the scenery and the landscape around everything is also like deteriorating. It just seems like everything is just decaying.
And also just a lot of candles, boatloads of candles. I had seen this film before. Dickerson is a little bit of like, I don't know, it's just a fascinating little niche of a director to me. Because, he was Spike Lee's go-to cinematographer for the first part of his career, Do the Right Thing, She's Gotta Have It, Malcolm X, all those movies, their unforgettable look is thanks to Ernest Dickerson. And so just even that to begin with is like, interesting to me. I love his movie Juice, which stars another rapper, Tupac Shakur. He also directed the Tales from the Crypt movie, Demon Knight. He's just got like such a strong, compelling, really colorful visual sensibility. It's really bold, and I mean, you can just like, even though this is a horror movie and Spike Lee's movies with Ernest Dickerson are not at all horror movies in this way, you can kind of tell that they're shot by the same person. It's not really shocking because of that or actually, I don't know. I don't think Dickerson was the cinematographer on. No, he was not the cinematographer on Bones, but of course, he had a hand in it. So it's not really shocking to me, the connection there. And it's just what a like fusion of different genres, that quote you shared about what High Plains Drifter meets Elm Street meets The Crow with Snoop Dogg is pretty on point, I think. Although throwing like a blaxploitation movie in there too, of course. By the way, I just want to say that I just looked up the cinematographer of Bones, Flavio Labiano, and he photographed the movies Unknown, Nonstop, and The Shallows, which are all very nice looking, well-directed movies. So there you go. Anyways.
All directed by Yame Colette Serra, right?
Yep.
Nice.
Malcolm, what'd you make of the visuals?
I mean, the visuals are very interesting. I especially responded early into the film of kind of like the cross-cutting between the 70s milieu and kind of like the modern day one. I think like just kind of like the way the film opens, like with how we're introduced to the character Bones, spinning his butterfly knife. It's very I can't help but think of a music video while watching it, because it has like this, it takes chances with the editing, and it has like this visual sensibility to sensationalize everything. And I thought it was a great way to introduce the character, and especially a character who is played by Snoop Dogg. But yeah, Dickerson's attention to visual, he's honestly, in my book, he's one of the best cinematographers of all time. He shot some of the best looking movies of all time. And so, when watching a Dickerson movie that, even with his later work, that the visuals are going to be a redeeming quality.
Well, when you think of like, especially some of his work with like Spike Lee, it's very close quarters. It's very kind of confrontational at times, and that seems to really work effectively for this body horror, deeply disturbing, grotesque movie. Because, I think that just kind of abjectly, like having the black gray body things that come out of the wall can be kind of hokey and silly.
God,
but
yeah.
the way that they're shot, they're so like they feel almost like they have a 3D projectile effect, even though it's it's 2D. There's something so invasive about them when they appear.
I mean, yeah, that feels like this whole Renaissance tableau almost. There's these bodies crawling out of the wall. It's just like very directed. Every angle feels very extreme, and every color is really kind of overemphasized. A lot of red, blue, green, like very strong shades of those colors. I feel like. And then you have the sort of the sepia tone in the parts of the movies that are set in the 1970s, which I feel like it gives it a nice subtle distinction. It's not like overemphasized sort of hokey flashback kind of visual look. It just has a little warmth to it to distinguish between present and past. Whereas the present of the movie is, like we've said, decaying and just like very cold and foreboding, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I love about kind of like the urban decay it displays in this film, I feel like it kind of, it kind of reaches beyond its, kind of like giallo kind of like influence, and kind of shows kind of like, I feel like Snoop Dogg's character, he's super mad about the urban decay, how things have gone and stuff. It's in a very American type of bitterness, and like Bones is a very bitter individual when he resurrects and even kills, his closest friend. Spoiler, I guess, kills his closest friend who was there protecting him. He's like, he should have done more. And it's just, I don't know, there's something very raw, and it does speak to the Eastwood influence.
I mean, yeah, it is sort of Western flavor, I guess, to the conflict, because it is about like Snoop Dogg wants to like protect his neighborhood. He wants to like save the community, which is, I feel like, a very sort of Western theme. Every John Ford movie is like about community. So there's that element to it. So it is this interesting fusion of this sort of visual influence from Italy and from Gothic horror, a very European flair, but with this very American conflict. It's about community, and it's also about property. The whole conflict of this movie generates with the ownership of this dilapidated, abandoned building, and is basically about it's basically a horror movie about gentrification and property ownership. I feel like it's actually got some smart things to say beneath the surface. I don't know if you guys agree with me on that or not.
Oh,
well, it's kind of like those people who wronged him. It can kind of seem almost like a cartoonish, like we were talking about, like a Western cliche that I have to come back and fight back for the community. But these are all people who, for the for the most part, except for the one random cop guy, are like black individuals who are living within the neighborhood, who are part of this community, and they use like their power and influence both before and then after his death in order to continue to rise. It seems like everybody post Bones's death has use that in order to catapult them to places of greater influence. And so it's kind of this this kind of sly commentary on losing your roots, losing the perspective that you had when you were much more focused on helping the smaller community, helping the people around you, and your ambition has kind of gotten the best of you. And that's really what their undoing is, rather than this mystical ghost figure who's coming and looking for retribution.
I also feel like, though, there's like, maybe this is just my it's my tendency to read things in this way. I don't know. There's like a very a kind of a political edge to it, because so often, people look at, the kind of neighborhood that this movie is about, this poor, predominantly Black neighborhood, and they say, oh, those people are like on drugs, they're lazy, blah, blah, blah. And so here, the scapegoat is always like crime or whatever. So here you see the real, like, ultimate issue is not that you have Snoop Dogg as Jimmy Bones going around, as a pimp. He's not really the ultimate problem. He's the one who wants to actually stay in the community and invest in it and build it up and support it. It's business and the police who are the ones who want to kind of suck this community dry and then leave, because basically, to, I guess, break the plot / conflict of this movie down for our listeners who maybe haven't seen it. Jimmy Bones's associates want to introduce crack cocaine into the community. He says, no, I don't want to destroy people. I don't want to I love these people. I don't want to ruin their lives with this filth. Like, we're not going to do it. So they kill him. They start to sell drugs in this neighborhood. And then all of these business associates leave. They flee to the suburbs, they get out of there and they do really well for themselves. So looking up the name of his, who is that? His, Jeremiah, I guess, his partner, his children come back years later, buy up this old abandoned building where now the ghost of Bones resides in the body of a, dog,
Yeah.
So it's like, every chicken's kind of coming home to roost, I don't know. I feel like it's like at the end of the movie when, spoiler alert, Bones kills everybody, including Jeremiah, he tells him, he's like, you just wanted to like own something for yourself. So I feel like this movie in this, maybe unintentional way is kind of about like the violence of property ownership, like they just want to, the characters in this movie just want to own and they just want to have a piece of something, and there's no way for them to get it without destroying other people. So, the killing at the end of the movie that Bones does when it basically turns into this like drifter slasher movie, is their comeuppance for that, I guess. It's sort of saying like, don't, it's this cycle of gentrification, I guess, that you see where like people suck a community dry, say, they condemn it, they flee from it. And then years later they come back and they say, oh, this is cool. This is edgy. Like, let's put in a nightclub and kick everyone out. I don't know. I feel like this movie has a sort of, at the very least, a sort of like has enough of kind of the right ideas and signifiers for me to fill in the gaps. Maybe, I don't think it's necessarily an intentional commentary, but I feel like, I don't know, horror has a capacity to say intelligent things. And I feel like this movie does that. I don't know. Anyways, I just monopolized the microphone for a long time. I just have a lot to say about this movie.
No, it's good.
So
I definitely agree. And there's definitely some things that happen in the movie that I think that make what you're saying, I think it's definitely within the text of the movie. Like thinking of the Jeremiah character, the father of all the children who by the nightclub, there's this distinct line where he says, I was not given what I had to go out and get it. And, the things that he had to do to go get it basically, speak to the decimation of the community. And then you have, the pimp character who seems to be still within the community, but being, kind of destroying it, with, his best interest in mind and, working with, police who, also have kind of taken away from the community. And I got to give a shout out to Michael T. Weiss as the, greasy fat cop, because that's one of the greasiest and, most grotesque cop characters I've seen in a while.
Yeah, his like face makeup is horrifying. Like scarier maybe than anything else in the movie is just the amount of shit piled on his face.
Oh, definitely. And like for fans looking for that Gerard Butler and Den of Thieves feeling, give Bones a watch, because I think Michael T. Weiss it's a good supplement to that.
Let's kind of shifting to the
Right.
reason we're watching this. Let's talk a little bit about Pam Grier in this film. Last week we talked about how she's in Ghosts of Mars for all of 15-20 minutes. This one she gets a little bit more substantial role, and it feels kind of equally suited to her. She gets to kind of ham up this wonderful the crazy psychic lady of the neighborhood, and I think is perfectly attuned to play this role. I mean, what did you make of this as kind of a late in her career Pam Grier role?
I think it's like sort of a nice aging into this kind of role because, I mean, as we have seen with so many genre stars, beyond just action, beyond just horror, just genre stars in general, some of them find a niche in their old age, and some of them keep trying to do the same thing and can't really do it anymore because they're getting old. And this is just like a perfect role because it's not like, really demanding like intense physical work from her, but also is just like, she just seems perfectly suited to this kind of like matronly, kooky psychic lady, but who's also the kind of, the horror trope of the wise old person who warns the young people who are going into danger. She's just suited, the old Pam Grier is suited well for that, but she's also still got, she's still like so spry and like youthful still at the same time. So it's like, even though the de-aged Pam Grier in this movie looks a little weird, like it's not fully believable, which is not really the point, but I think she still is able to play both like the old and the younger versions of herself in this movie pretty well. Like she can do both of those very well still. And like, yeah, there's like a big age difference between her and Snoop Dogg, which is kind of funny to me. I don't know, just them together is just a weird pairing, but also like not that weird. And I buy it, they're just these two like deeply iconic personas with so much charisma, both of them to boot. So like, I totally buy their romantic coupling in this movie.
Definitely. Yeah, it's like I think you're right. They both ooze this very natural charisma. Both of their characters, I feel like, weren't like they didn't explicitly write anything for them. They were just kind of like, both of them, yeah, just go and do stuff. Like, I'm sure your choice will be fine, because it feels both of these characters feel very natural to them and the choices that they make. I mean, really the most affecting scene to me is halfway through the movie when Pam Grier's character is like running a seance, and at the same time her daughter is like being like closely possessed by Bones, and there's like this weird connection between her and her daughter and Bones, and it becomes like this very explicit giallo sequence where like the daughter is being like covered in this this buckets of like giallo grade blood, and it's just like this like deeply gothic tragedy-ish, like it feels very much something like pulled out of like a Renaissance painting or some sort of gothic novel. Like it seems almost a little bit over the top, but the way that Dickerson shoots it, and also just the way that all of these actors are selling it, it just feels like this very just incredible sequence that just happens randomly in the middle of this movie.
Yeah, I mean, there's even like more genres to this movie, right? Like, you have blaxploitation, horror, Western, but then you have the gothic romantic melodrama, that this movie really, like, at its heart becomes this romance between Snoop and Pam Grier, and as I feel like she's kind of in a way the sort of the anchor of the movie ultimately. Like, she's not in tons of it, but she's the sensible, really grounded character, even while also being a psychic. You know, she's the sort of, I feel like, the heart of this movie, and also the historical connection to blaxploitation. You know, she's really what connects this movie to the 1970s. So this movie does have this sort of like gravitas of history to it because of her presence in it. So I feel like she really anchors this movie, honestly.
No, yeah, Grier's almost, her iconography almost as like a 70s star really works well in, especially, and I think she's good throughout the whole movie, but in the 70s, you know, setting and milieu, it's like you said, you know, she knows how to carry herself in these scenes because, you know, she, you know, was a star of the 70s and stuff like that. And she, it's almost like, you know, kind of Snoop Dogg is kind of like this kind of weightless, you know, walking on air type of personality. And Pam Grier kind of, you know, almost is kind of grounds it emotionally, at least in those scenes for me.
Yeah, no, she feels like, you know, she's seen some shit, you know, and has like you just really feel like her life experience, I guess, when she's on screen.
To be fair, she feels like that, and at least in the series that we've done in every one of these movies, it feels like she's seen some shit.
That's just her, you know. But now she's old, so she's like both ends of having seen some shit, you know.
Definitely. We've talked about him a little bit, but I mean, I think what do you make of Snoop Dogg's performance in this? Malcolm and I were talking a little bit off mic beforehand, and it just kind of feels like there's not a lot of him. You know, it's kind of weird. It's not like you are just inundated with Snoop Dogg, but he has enough time, I feel like, to at least make some sort of impression, whether that's positive or negative.
Yeah, he is sort of just like walking through the movie a little bit, but like you said, Malcolm, you know, he does just sort of like collide through just everything in seemingly everywhere he in life. You know, it just seems effortless. So I don't really mind that at all. It works well for the role that he's in, because by the end of the movie, he has just sort of turned into like a cowboy Freddy Krueger dressed in black, you know, doing these sort of like wacky supernatural murders and like spouting off kind of one-liners in a dry, you know, Snoop Dogg manner. So I think it's like, you know, works well for him. And like when he said, you know, the quote from him, you know, where he said that it was built around him, like it really does feel like it was built around him. He, you know, he's somebody who he's been in a lot of movies, but I always feel like I on one hand, sometimes I do feel like maybe he probably gets the right parts. On the other hand, though, I always would like to see him a little bit more sometimes in the movies that he's in, but I don't know. It at least has me very excited for the Beach Bum. You know, he's just such an. I mean, I don't know how many times you can say somebody's just a natural presence, but he just really is. So.
Yeah, I think it's best to not ask Snoop Dogg to act possibly too much, if that makes sense, because like I feel like maybe like a movie that's built around a lot of Snoop Dogg's acting, the only one I could think of that comes to mind is Mac and Devin Go to High School. And which you know, I remember Snoop's acting in that, and I'm not, you know, I couldn't possibly blame the director, but it's, you know, it's not, I don't, you know, I think you're right in that the movie has to be built around him or his character, or his character has to be somewhat, you know, related to his already established persona. And I think Bones does a good job with that. And I think Ernest Dickerson, looking at Ernest Dickerson's filmography, he has worked with a lot of rappers. Actors,
DMX.
And Ice-T for Surviving the Game. And I, to be honest, I haven't seen those movies, but I have seen Juice. And Tupac is definitely a more polished actor than Snoop, I would say. But like, I still think the milieu that Juice is in perfectly fits kind of the persona Tupac had already created for himself. And I think Bones does a great job in doing that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this is, you know, like, I don't know, by this point already, Snoop Dogg being a few years into the game, just had this sort of like stone cold killer kind of persona, like working with No Limit Records, like around this time in the early 2000s and stuff. I feel like he was just kind of a straight up murderer when it came to the bars. So it makes sense that he is also that here. It's just like a cool. It's very interesting to hear that he has an affection for Clint Eastwood, both because now I like which Clint Eastwood movies, and also just thinking about Snoop Dogg as a sort of analogous to Clint Eastwood is very interesting.
We gotta let Clint know so they can link up for a movie before it's all said.
I know. Could you imagine a sequel to The Mule? Just Clint Eastwood and Snoop Dogg in a car.
Dude.
Green Book, but with Clint Eastwood driving Snoop Dogg.
Damn, imagine Snoop Dogg passing Clint the blunt. I'd have to crack a smile.
Call Nick Vallelonga up. Maybe honestly, that's what The Beach Bum is, because I know that in that movie that Jimmy Buffett and Snoop Dogg are supposed to write like a song together. Oh. So maybe The Beach Bum is really just Green Book, but with Jimmy Buffett and Snoop Dogg.
Kareem knew what we wanted before we even knew,
I know. Wow. 6 steps ahead, it's like 5-dimensional chess. Oof.
The last thing I was kind of curious about with Bones is, like I mentioned at the beginning, it didn't do very well at the box office. But at the same time, like the reviews weren't like overwhelmingly terrible. Like it seemed like a lot of people kind of vibed with it. I don't know, just kind of armchair thoughts. Why do you think that this didn't hit with audiences? Like, because I feel like this, they mentioned franchise potential, and you could see like 5 of these movies where he just keeps coming back and killing people.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the poster, and that's just kind of a great poster, and B, looks, it has this logo and everything, and the Bones font. So it feels like it maybe had franchise potential. I don't really know, honestly. I mean, maybe it was just a little too weird. It is like we've been saying, this, gothic, kind of gross movie, and thinking about other horror movies coming out around then, like, I don't really know if it fits in super well, because I feel like that was a sort of transitional time for horror movies, where, around the same time as Ghosts of Mars Last Week, which also feels like a sort of transitional movie because it's like kind of new metal, but also, it's by John Carpenter, who's like a elder statesman of horror, and it's trying to do something new, but not fully succeeding. And I feel like Bones is also just sort of this weird time where like horror is figuring itself out. And then, the 2002 and 2003, you start to have kind of the introduction of air quotes, because I don't like this term, but torture porn, and like, all of the Michael Bay produced Platinum Dunes horror remakes. And so you start to have like the trends of the decade, I feel like, emerge like the year or two after this. So I feel like it maybe just came in a weird time where like this wasn't really like anything else, and so it just didn't really stick. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts as to why it maybe didn't do well, but
no, I kind of agree with you. I think it just was, I don't know, it just, I guess, didn't have that wider appeal to people. Like, I don't think they necessarily got what it was doing. It kind of like we discussed in the first half of this conversation, it does have kind of higher ambitions than just being like some Nightmare on Elm Street ripoff. It's not like it's just trying to capitalize on that and just throw Snoop Dogg in there. Like we talked about, there is some meat and some weight to the narrative that it's presenting. It's doing a lot more with the visuals than you would get if it was some sort of knockoff ripoff of a previous horror success. And I don't know, maybe it's one of those cases, it's just a little too ambitious and came at the wrong time.
Yeah,
I think you're right. I think it's hard to put this movie in a box, as we were describing, with its mix of genre and stuff like that. And you look at maybe some other horror movies that came out at the time. I don't know. I think like Session 9 or like The Others or something like that. Like those, like Session 9 is a movie it's a mental institution horror movie, and it's exactly that. You get like 2 hours of that, you get I don't know, you get that Robert Caruso star power. But something like Bones is very, like ambitious, and I don't know, the tone is it's mixed too. It's also very funny at times too, like to where a point where a less educated viewer would be like, oh, this is stupid. It's not scary. Like, I'm above this, which would be a way of thinking for, the populace at the time.
I guess it does fit into like, there's maybe a mini sort of blaxploitation revival at the beginning of the 2000s. Like you have the Shaft sequel and Undercover Brother at the same time. So like maybe it was trying to fit itself in with that. But again, like we've said, it's like 6 different genres. So I think, again, it's just, it's like you said, Malcolm, it's like somebody who's maybe not going in thinking about like all of these different elements, putting this movie together, is just going to be like, oh, it's not enough of one thing. It's not scary enough, but it's also not funny enough, but it's also, whatever, it's not enough of any one thing. It's a bunch of different little things pieced together. So I like movies like that. So works for me.
Any kind of wrap up thoughts as we come to an end on our Pam Grier series? To me, I was really happy that we ended up doing this. I think that I just really gained a lot of appreciation for her as just this persona. There's just like she really just does. I said it when we first started in the first movie, but she really, when she comes on screen, she completely just owns it. And even here, where she's given a larger part than she was in Ghosts of Mars, but still, it's kind of second build to Snoop Dogg, who's the star. She's able to really create a personality for herself, and I think. I don't know. We talked with Mia Mask, halfway through the series, and she talked about kind of, roles drying up. And I just feel like Pam Grier was an actress who definitely should have been in like much more mainstream big movies, because she is definitely like a movie star, but clearly just was overlooked egregiously, and I think that's just really kind of a bummer, because I think you could stick her in so many roles and she would be instantly just fantastic and instantly fun to watch. I mean, like I said last week with Ghost of Mars, like I would have substituted her for Ice Cube in the lead role. Like I would just let her play that role. Like it would have been fantastic.
And I think the thing is too, though, even though you say she a lot of times had a career sort of like on the fringes of the mainstream a little bit, in these sort of lower B genres. It is a really sort of, is a lens into a kind of a lot of changes, I think, in film in America over the decades, because all these movies that we've looked at are these different genres, from women in prison to blaxploitation to sort of Quentin Tarantino, like prestige exploitation revival, to like sci-fi, new metal horror, to this, whatever Bones is. It is a sort of like a fascinating way to look at how much has changed and how much hasn't changed in sort of genre filmmaking on an industrial level over the past 4 to 5 decades. So,
yeah, that is true, because we definitely have, bounced very far back and forth to different places, and again, that's a testament to Pam Grier, because she's great in all of them. it's like she rolls with whatever you're giving her. Big Pam fan now.
And I haven't watched a lot of movies where Pam Grier had big roles besides, I guess, Above the Law, the Seagal movie. But watching her in this movie, I mean, her screen presence is, truly undeniable. And those are some of my favorite actors, just someone with an undeniable screen presence. So I'm definitely going to atone for my sins and catch up on her filmography.
Well, I guess that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode, and finally on Patreon at patreon.com/Cinematary if you would like to support the show. Coming up next week, we will be starting our next very ambitious series. I'm kind of excited about this one. I don't think we don't think we really have a name for it. It's pretty much, I guess the most easy way to describe it is it's Southern movies, fact or fiction. We're taking narrative films about the South and we paired them with a documentary that kind of has it's covering a similar subject or going about something in a similar way. And so, over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, we'll be doing that. We're going to be kicking it off next week with To Kill a Mockingbird and Did You Wonder Who Fired the Gun? Then we have Deliverance and Hillbilly. Then Marjorie and Wiseblood, Heart-Worn Highways and Nashville, Harlan County, USA, and Norma Ray, The Color Purple, and Hale County, This Morning, This Evening, Four Little Girls, and Selma, and then we'll wrap it up with Breaking the Huddle and Remember the Titans. So kind of excited to go through this one. I mean, for me, the reason I kind of wanted to get into this series is I think that there is this very narrativized, idealized, whatever you want to, nostalgic, however you want to describe it, view of the South that is perpetrated through kind of not just narrative movies, but also TV shows and literature and etc. And I think that pairing, these iconic versions of this very Southern thing with a documentary that's kind of either permeating that specific subject. I know our first 2 weeks, the documentaries are literally in conversation with the narrative movie that we're talking about. But some of them we kind of went off on a limb to a little bit and are exploring just what is the larger idea of the South and what is the more South's idea of the South. And I think that's really interesting and a subject that should be explored today. So I will be posting these pairings on cinematary.com tomorrow, so please check it out. Until then, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week. We will wrap up this episode with a thank you to our Patreon subscribers. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Cam, Christopher Metcalf, Matthew Lingo, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. We appreciate your donation, and thank you so much for supporting Cinematary.